Dear Earth Mother, please send me your wind.
Welcome to another episode of Wilderness Torah's Shmita Slowdown series. Thanks for being here. We're exploring Shmita, the seventh year of the 7-year cycle where we release land, debt, and those in servitude. An opportunity for us to explore rest, renewal, and transformation in a challenging world. Here at Wilderness Torah, we're using the Shmita year to clarify our purpose through strategic planning, to build the Center for Earth-Based Judaism through community charrette planning, and to explore Shmita through this Slowdown series. So, it's amazing to be here. My name is Rabbi Jill Golden, the Executive Director at Wilderness Torah, and I'm so thrilled to be here with our featured guest today, Rabbi Jill Hammer. Rabbi Jill is the Director of Spiritual Education at the Academy for Jewish Religion and also the co-founder of Kohenet Hebrew Priestess Institute. Rabbi Jill, you're one of my teachers, beloved teachers, and so it's a real joy and honor to have you here. And I want to uplift your recent writings, Under Torah, an Earth-Based Kabbalah of Dreams, and Return to the Place, the Magic, Meditation, and Mystery of the Sefer Yetzirah. You're an amazing author, an amazing thinker, and an amazing innovator in the field of Earth-Based Judaism. So we welcome you. For those of you who are with us, please use the live stream chat to submit questions that will funnel into the conversation, and we'll do our best to answer them. And finally, it's great to have you here now. And in our second year of the Introduction to Earth-Based Judaism, Rabbi Jill will be one of 4 guest teachers in a 6-class series on the Introduction to Earth-Based Judaism, and Jill will be helping us uplift the topic of revelation, how we bring Earth-Based Judaism alive as a personal path to revelation. So before we start the conversation, Rabbi Kohenet Jill, would you please offer anything else you want to say by way of introducing yourself, and then we'll dive into the topic.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Rabbi Zelig, for having me. The mission of Wilderness Torah is very dear to my heart, as you know, and I am so appreciative of the work that you do and the creativity that you bring to our ritual and ethical life. So thank you for having me. By way of introduction, I like to work with creativity and depth. I'm a writer, a dreamworker, a poet, a teacher, and scholar. I live in New York City, and a lot of the things that I work with, from Jewish mysticism to earth-based ritual, have to do with exploring our deep connection to the body of the earth, and to one another, and to our dreams and visions, as we live into the future. So I feel very resonant with what you just said about Shmita.
Awesome. Well, let's just start wide open and say more. What does Shmita mean to you personally? Why might it be a powerful thing for us to reintegrate into our lives as modern Jewish people?
Yeah. So I see this question a little bit on 2 levels. The first piece has to do with the way that the Shmita year is meant in some way as an attempt by the ancient Israelites to get into rhythm with the earth itself, right? Like humans have a Shabbat, right? They have 6 days, right? Israelites, right? But for them, right, they're expressing their humanity in that way by having 6 days of work and then 1 day of rest, right? And that's the human cycle. The earth cycle is longer. Right? And we actually know that Earth cycles are longer than human cycles, right? The Earth has been around longer than us, right? So there's 6 years, and then there's a 7th year, right? And then there's another cycle, which is 49 years, right? And the Jubilee year. So it's a human attempt to try to approximate what it's like to be living on the planet in our rhythm, and then also connect to the rhythms that are really much larger than us, and to recognize the independent relationship that the earth has with the cosmos that is not, doesn't belong to us, it is not really even accessible to us, right? But, it and all of its creatures have their own relationship. So for me, first and foremost, Shmita is a way of acknowledging that, right? There's sacred relationship between God and the earth, right? Between God and the cosmos, right? But, among all the beings of the cosmos, right? And we don't have a monopoly on any of that. And to the extent that we are able to tap into those rhythms, right, we can live in a more sustainable way. So, that's the first thing I would say about it.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I really resonate with how, it's almost like nested cycles, the human cycle, and the Hebrew calendrical cycle, and then earth cycle and cosmological cycles. Let's bring it back down to the individual for a moment before we continue out. What do you suppose Shmita has to offer in terms of the life of an individual at this time?
Yeah. So one thing that I think Shmita can offer us is the permission to stop doing things, right? There's a huge cultural imperative, in the society that we live in, or at least that I live in, but I think it's, it's pretty pervasive, to keep doing things, right? That's sort of what makes us valuable, what makes our days worthwhile, right? Is we're supposed to do things, be productive, work, create things, do things for other people. And of course, all those things are important and good. But there's a freneticness to that pace that's not only not good for us, but is actually not great for the planet, because it's not sustainable for us to continue to sort of do more and more things and use up more and more resources because of all the things we need to do. And we actually need to learn something about rest, as an important human activity and as a part of our effort towards sustainability. So I think, for the individual person, just the permission to take a break from, specifically, right, the original Shmita is about planting and harvesting, but perhaps more broadly, from what the Talmud calls masah matan, right? It's sort of give and take, right, of commerce of the world, to the extent that we can do that in whatever form. It's a positive, I think, especially right now, when we need cultural shift.
That's beautiful. So you are, in my view, one of our foremost experts on how we're bringing Judaism back into relationship with the earth, the natural world. And in this paradigm shift, as Rabbi Zalman Shabtai Shlomi, our teacher, Zichron Livracha, he said, this paradigm shift that we're in, the transformation of humanity inside of a cosmological shift, is in. He named that there are three big pieces. There's rooting down in our ancient tradition, which I consider you one of my teachers in, innovating on spiritual technology to make them relevant, which you're clearly at the forefront of through Kohenet and other works that you do. And thirdly, to keep revelation present. And you'll be teaching about revelation in our introductory class later this early summer. You are the author of Under Torah, an earth-based Kabbalah of dreams. You are a facilitator of ritual that opens and transforms us. I remember a ritual in 2006 I did with you at the Isabella Freeman Retreat Center, where you brought us into a threshold and it opened something up for me. And I was like, wow, revelation was alive in that moment. How do you relate that process of dream work, revelation, that key to evolving ourselves and our traditions with Shmita?
Beautiful. So I want to say two things about this. The first has to do with the dreams that you mentioned, which is that we are able to be creative when we rest, and we are able to be creative when we dream. And one of the gifts of dreams, and this is something scientists say, not just people like me who love dreams for spiritual reasons. Dreams allow us to solve problems. They allow us to come up with innovative solutions that we didn't think of. They allow us to look at things a new way. Certain kinds of radical theology have come out of people's dreams. The periodic table, right, came out of a scientist's dream. So allowing ourselves the space to dream, whether that means a sleeping dream, right, or whether it means just to be in a play space, is really crucial for not only solving our problems, but kind of figuring out how to live, right, in new ways. And so I think, Shmita provides at least, the potential for rest, and rest means play, right? Rest doesn't only mean sleep, right? Rest also means play. And creative play, some people have talked about ritual as adult play, like creative play and storytelling and narrative making allows for the new, right, to arise. And that's really what revelation is a fancy word for, right? Is I had a new insight that I had never had before, right? That that feels like it's bigger than me, right? That's really what revelation is. So I see it as connected in that way. The other thing I want to say is that as I've thought about Shmita sort of this year, what is my download about Shmita? I have to say that it feels this year like it's not just about the year of Shmita, but that this is actually like a generational calling, that we're actually being called to live in Shmita in some way. And that it's less about, for me right now, about the practice of the year, but more about how do we actually live in such a way that we are taking much less from the earth, and that we are investing much less in the work culture that is actually not so healthy for a lot of us. So that's my my personal revelation about Shmita right now is this is not just a practice to do and then set aside, but this is actually a generational practice that we need to be feeling into in a much more sustained way.
Amen. Amen. I lift that up, and I feel the truth in that. When I was first introduced to some of these concepts, Shmita, the seventh year, was introduced to me, and I'm pretty sure it was Yigal Deutscher, another one of my blessed teachers and beloved Wilderness Torah community members, and he said, the seventh year, Shmita is not about the seventh year, it's about the 6 years. Mm-hmm. It's about us being forced to pull away from control, and then that becomes an implicit process that forces us to design the other 6 years very differently.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, it reminds me of something that the Mehashiloach, this Hasidic commentary says about the Shmita, is that it's specifically designed for people to give up their sense of control over people, over land, and over money. And it feels very relevant. And
Rabbi Isaac Cook, the Rav Cook, said in his introduction to Shabbat Haaretz, the rest of the land, the Shabbat of the land, and this is at the beginning of the 20th century. He wrote, I think, in 1909. It says, what Shabbat does for the individual, Shmita does for humanity. And during Shmita, the pure inner spirit may be revealed. And I'm curious, Rabbi Jill, it's a generational instruction that you're inspired. And I would say, what is one healing or change in humanity that you would hope Shmita inspires us to? Like, where would you dream we go because of Shmita?
Well, one of the pieces of Shmita, right, is that, as you said beautifully earlier, is to release people from servitude, right? That one of the things that's supposed to happen in Shmita, right, is that no one is supposed to be in debt, in any way that, constrains them for the rest of their lives, right? That's part of how Shmita is supposed to work. And no one is supposed to be severed from their connection to the land, right, in a permanent way. And I think it would be so beautiful to see us as a global society take those things to heart. It's a fact of modern life and a very distressing one, right? That so much of what we have, right, comes from, right, labor that we don't really know anything about, right, or whether it's fair or not, and often it isn't, right? We don't really have a global commitment to to freedom from the kinds of servitude that the Bible is talking about. And that's what I would see as, is what I would want the dream of Shmita to be, right? Is a real commitment to, what does it mean to not want to really reject taking on the kind of karmic load, right? To borrow a term from another culture, of all of that pressure, right, on often poorer societies, right, often people of color, right, to provide all the things that we have. And what would it mean to really, as a planet, figure out how to create and distribute resources, right, without relying on this kind of invisible servitude, or right, invisible only to some of us, really.
Certainly, yeah, this is gorgeous. So Shmita, this principle, is at once agricultural, resting the land. It's economic, it's releasing of debt, and it's social, it's the releasing of servitude. From a halachic perspective, from the perspective of like Jewish law and orthopractic observation of the law, Shmita as a land-based admonishment only applies to the four corners of Israel. My understanding is that from an economic perspective, it only applies between Jews and Jews, as well as it relates to servitude. So someone who knows the halacha and observes the halacha would say to me, well, you're in New York, Rabbi Jill, and you're in California, Rabbi Zelig. Why do I need to do anything related to the land? And all my debts are in relationship to this or that. It's not a relation between a Jew and a non-Jew. And I'm thinking of Reb Zalman again and his approach to halacha, Jewish law, as an integral approach, integral halacha, how we go deep, we dive deep into the intentions of the laws and see how we repurpose them. And I'm hearing you doing that. You're making broader strokes about how we apply these as principles in a broken world to move towards a more just and a healthier society. And I'm wondering if you could take us a little deeper into that. How would you address more traditionally oriented Jews, and also those of us who want to know how to navigate these old principles for a modern time? Like, how do we deploy Shmita really skillfully in the ways that you're talking about?
I think this is a case, it's not just true of our generation, but it's true of previous generations, and certainly of the sages of the Talmud, that they took principles and practices from the Bible and they applied them to their own society in ways that probably the Bible could not have imagined, right? And in terms of Shmita, many scholars think Shmita never actually happened, right? Because they can't figure out economically how it could have worked, right? To leave the land fallow for a whole year, when people were subsistence farmers, would that really work? So some people say yes, some people say no, right? But there's there is a sense for me that when Shmita is observed kind of to the letter of the law of Shmita today, often it relies on farmers from other cultures and religions, right, to make it work, right? You just don't farm yourself, right? But you buy produce from other people, right, who aren't observing, the same tribal laws, and that's the current practice, and people are doing it, and I certainly don't have any criticism, but what I would say is, ethically speaking, it doesn't go very far, right? It's really kind of observing, it's like counting the Omer, right? It's kind of observing the mitzvah, but there's more meaning content, right, in the laws of Shmita and the texts about Shmita than that, I think, and we can expand that. And there is no real reason why we shouldn't, right? There's nothing to prevent us from creating, more just relationships to people and land anywhere we go. There's certainly no prohibition on doing so. So I would say, whether or not you're in a personal relationship with Jewish law, there are things we can learn from Shmita that we can apply in a larger context.
Beautiful.
And let me say one last thing, which is, I think it's so important for everyone to have a relationship with land, you know, and with Earth. And, you know, to me, that means planet Earth.
Yeah. When I was in college, I did a study abroad program on sustainability. And that was in 1994. That might betray how old I am, but so that's fine. And what we learned was that the concept of sustainability rested on three pillars: one ecological, one economic, and one social. And when I first learned of Shmita, I was kind of shocked because Shmita rests on three principles: one ecological, one economic, and one social. And I thought, oh, wow, Shmita is actually the Jewish sustainable operating system, or in today's language, we might say it's the pathway for regenerative culture. And I'm hearing you say that Shmita is not just a mitzvah or a legal pathway, but it's actually a set of values that are very deep, and maybe they're totally aspirational, just like sustainability is totally aspirational. But in these times, maybe it's more important than ever to work on embracing those. And so I really want to uplift this broad application of Shmita. And I think I want to ask one more question, and then I think we'll move towards wrapping. And that is, as Wilderness Torah moves into building a relationship with a specific piece of land, this is the land that's stewarded by Camp Newman. It's a URJ summer camp. It's 500 acres in the hills of Sonoma County. It's ancestral lands of the Onatsatis, also known as the Wapo, overlaid by Coast Miwok and Pomo peoples. And we're really asking the question, how do we develop a relationship to land, colonized land, while honoring and uplifting and hopefully coming into solidarity with the First Nations peoples? And I'm wondering if you have any suggestions or thoughts on Shmita might dovetail with this work of Indigenous solidarity.
I really love this question. One thing I would say is that, and I'm saying this because I have been told it, I have been taught it by by Indigenous folks and their allies, that it's really good to have, as I know you do, relationships with people in the present, right? That who can say how they feel about that and can advise you about that. I think that's very, that makes a lot of sense to me. And Shmita, in its essence, really is also about making sure that people get to keep their ancestral connection to land. And if we actually applied that, across the board and not just to ourselves, right, that would certainly mean honoring and being careful about, right, the Indigenous connection to land and lifting that up and, and centering it. So I think doing that, naming it, and figuring out how to be in good relationship with that, seems to me to be the essence of Shmita, really. One thing that I sometimes say to my students when they ask me, well, how can I be in relationship to land if I'm on colonized land, right, or I'm on land that my ancestors didn't live on, right? How can I have a relationship to land? And the two things that I would say is, we all have a kind of energetic magnetic connection to Earth. That's just a thing that we have, as part of our, birthright as beings who live here. But I also talk about how in Genesis, when Abraham and Sarah are wandering around, and they build altars wherever they go, right? They build altars as a way of making connection with God and a way of making connection with the land. But they don't own the land that they're on, right? They're not using the altars to kind of stake a claim in the land. Right, altars might get used that way later, right? But they don't use it that way, right? They built the altars, and they pray there, and then they go somewhere else, right? And then they, they build another altar. So for them, the altars are less kind of staking a claim, like this is ours, right? When it, in fact, maybe right, land may not be ours, right? But it is a way of saying I want to be in relationship with this place at this moment, and so that's a big teaching for me. Is making sacred space doesn't mean owning the space, and it might mean, and in fact it does for Avraham, being in good relationship, right relationship with the people right around us, and it means honoring the gifts that land gives us, of sustenance and nourishment and air and water and all those things, which it does generously, no matter where we come from.
Thank you. Yeah, it's gorgeous to emulate the ancestors in that way. And just like Shemitah is an aspiration, and to release Shemitah, release every 7 years, the Yovel, the 7 cycles of 7 coming to the 50th year, there's this land ownership reverting back to its original owners. And so you might say, wow, back to the First Nations peoples. But what I'm actually hearing is yes, and perhaps it's an acknowledgement that no one owns the land in truth. And if we can like embrace that principle, that value could drive our behavior on land. Where would that get us in relationship to each other, in relationship to the land? And so, wow, this is a true deepening of how we can see and understand Shemitah for our time. So thank you. Is there any last thing that you want to offer before we wrap up? Because we're about to run out of time here, unfortunately.
Yeah, just that I think it's beautiful to come together to celebrate Shemitah. That's a thing that Shemitah doesn't necessarily entail celebration, but I think that it really could. We really could make it a Shabbat, where we celebrate Shabbat with the Lamb.
I love that. I love that. And then when the Shemitah ends, we invoke the Hakel and the new 7-year cycle and remind ourselves that it's not humans who control the land, it's God, and that we begin the 7-year cycle of cultivating. And so, wow, may the cycles continue. Well, I'm delighted to have spent this time with you, and thank you so much, Rabbi Kohenet Jill, for being here. And we're excited to launch the Introduction to Earth-Based Judaism course. And Rabbi Jill, we're excited to have you there. Do you want to give us like 30 seconds of what you can imagine doing in that course, maybe inspire people to come and join you for that?
Sure. Well, we'll be going on imaginative journeys that are located within the body and in the here and now, right? And to see sort of what are the sacred voices that are speaking to us, right, in the moment. And how do we cultivate a sense of that? And how do we cultivate a sense of sacred dreaming, sort of in our waking lives?
Amazing. That'll be, I think, class 5 in a series of 6 after exploring some more foundational stuff like just Gaian consciousness in Jewish tradition, the Hebrew calendar, fire, water. So I'm excited to do that with you again, Rabbi Jill. And thank you so much for being here. And thank you everyone for joining us during this time. And to learn more about the Shmita Slowdown work, check out Wilderness Torah at wildernesstorah.org. And you can also learn about the design charrette process and developing the Center for Earth-Based Judaism and how we're working to reimagine Wilderness Torah for the next 7-year cycle, centering marginalized voices through our justice, diversity, equity, inclusivity work, developing an indigenous solidarity set of values as we come into relationship with land, and bringing forth a whole new strategic plan for the next 7 years. So stay tuned. And 2 weeks from now, join us for another episode of the Shmita Slowdown series. And until then, thank you very much. And thank you again, Rabbi Jill. Such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Zelig. It was wonderful to speak with you.
Yeah, thank you.
Dear Earth.